In the deep silence of an untouched forest, where trees whispered ancient secrets and the air held the damp scent of wild earth, something stirred that would shatter its quiet rhythm. It wasn't the usual call of a bird or the cautious steps of deer. It was the pounding of large paws pressing into the soil, scattering leaves as they fled. A mother bear rushed through the dense greenery, her breath heavy and eyes wide with instinctive urgency. Behind her, two tiny shapes struggled to follow, their legs short and still unsure of the world. But only one managed to keep up. The other, the smaller of the two, limped with a sharp tremble in every step, dragging one leg through the underbrush, far behind the others. The sky above remained clouded, casting a gray veil across the trees, and the breeze that moved through the branches seemed to carry with it a strange kind of weight. It was as if the forest itself sensed something unusual in the air, something that held more than just a normal rhythm of predator and prey. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, as if holding its breath. The mother bear paused briefly at a clearing, ears perked and nose twitching, as if sensing a distant danger. But her attention never turned back. Her eyes locked forward. The healthy cub tumbled forward, keeping pace as best it could, but the injured one let out a low, helpless sound from far behind, collapsing against the base of a tree. Its tiny body shivered, not from cold, but from confusion and pain. Still, the mother moved on. Her instinct screamed survival. Whatever had startled her was close enough that hesitation could mean death for all of them. In the wild, choices are cruel and often final. She did not look back again. The injured cub, left alone under the looming shadow of the forest, tried once more to rise. It failed. Its body folded back to ground, and the leaves around it barely moved. The forest grew still again, but this time it wasn't calm. It was sorrowful, the kind of stillness that comes only when something has been left behind. The forest, once alive with rustling leaves and bird song, now held a heavy silence, as if the very trees mourned the decision that had just unfolded. The mother bear, massive and powerful, had paused only briefly, her head turning ever so slightly in the direction of the whimpering cub left behind. She could hear it, its small cries floating through the stillness like a soft echo, weak and uncertain. But survival in the wild was not a place for emotion. It was a place of urgency, a place where hesitation could mean the end for all. The healthy cub nudged her leg, unaware of the siblings' growing distance. The mother's body remained tense, her muscles coiled, eyes scanning the terrain ahead. There was something in the air, a scent, a sound too low for human ears, something that triggered a decision no mother ever wanted to make. She began to move again, this time more deliberately, her stride steady and firm. The healthy cub followed, barely keeping up. Behind her, the injured cub had collapsed completely. Its small frame trembled as it tried to lift its head, confused and desperate. The pain in its leg pulsed with every attempt to move. It gave a long, aching cry, a sound that didn't carry far, but reached deep into the heart of the forest. No response came, only the fading sound of rustling leaves, slowly swallowed by distance. The cub's eyes searched the shadows, not understanding why the warm, safe presence of its mother was now gone. There was no threat nearby now, only the invisible memory of something that had been close, something that had forced the bear to choose. Whether it was the scent of a predator or the echo of a distant noise, it was enough. The clearing slowly emptied of sound. The cub lay motionless beneath a crooked tree, its chest rising and falling quickly, its cries now quiet sobs. The leaves around it trembled slightly in the breeze, but no help came. Just a low moan of the wind and the quiet hum of forest life continuing on, unaware or unable to change what had happened. The cub was alone, just beyond a bend of the forest, where thick trees opened into soft, sun-dappled patches of moss and wildflowers. A quiet miracle wandered into the story. A human baby, no older than a year, had slipped unnoticed from a nearby campsite. The family, having chosen the edge of the forest for a weekend escape, had turned away for only a moment. It was all the time the child needed to toddle away, drawn by flickers of light through the trees and the soft crunch of leaves beneath tiny feet. The baby moved with the unsteady steps of innocence, arms occasionally flailing for balance, eyes wide with curiosity. There was no fear, No understanding of the towering trees or the hidden threats that often moved silently through the shadows. Only wonder. The forest was a place of strange smells and endless shapes, and the baby was wrapped in a quiet, fragile confidence. Step by step, the child drifted deeper, past fallen logs and winding roots, through branches that gently brushed against soft cheeks. And then, without warning, the wandering path came to a pause. In the clearing just ahead, barely visible through the brush, lay a shape. It was small, furred, and motionless except for the faint rise and fall of breath. The baby tilted forward, drawn by the form in the grass. The cub, injured and barely conscious, lifted its head slightly. Its pain dulled by exhaustion, it made no move. It didn't cry. It simply stared. The child stumbled a few more steps and dropped down beside the cub. There was no recognition of danger, no caution, just a shared stillness. Two lives from different worlds, both far from where they should have been. One driven by instinct, the other by innocence. In that clearing, under a soft shaft of filtered sunlight, they stayed, neither knowing what would come next. But something had already shifted. The forest, which had held its breath in sorrow, now began to hold it for something else. Something it had never seen before. The forest, which moments ago seemed heavy with sadness, now held something softer in the air. A strange stillness settled over the clearing. Not the hush of danger, but the delicate silence of two fragile beings discovering each other. The human baby, unaware of fear or rules, leaned forward on tiny hands and knees. With a clumsy motion, the child reached out and placed a small hand gently on the cub's trembling side. The touch was light, but to the injured cub, it was enough to stir something. A slight twitch passed through its fur as it felt the warmth of the baby's palm. It didn't flinch or growl. It didn't retreat. The pain in its leg still pulsed, but the strange little creature beside it made no move to harm or startle. The cub blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the soft presence near it. The baby sat down, legs folded beneath the small body, and tilted its head as if trying to understand what the cub was. There was no recognition of species, no sense of the wild or the rules that came with it, just curiosity and softness. The baby's tiny fingers brushed gently along the cub's fur, leaving behind a trail of warmth and comfort the cub hadn't known it needed. For a long time they stayed like that. The cub's breath slowed, not from fear, but from a quiet that crept into its body, a calm that came not from safety, but from something it had never felt before, companionship in the most unlikely form. They shared the same air, the same cold breeze brushing against their skin and fur. Two small figures, surrounded by towering trees in the wide, wild world, but in that moment, their circle was small. There were no cries, no growls, only the rustle of wind and the quiet, steady rhythm of life holding on. Innocence met innocence, not in defiance of nature's rules, but in a space where those rules seemed to pause. The forest, ancient and wise, seemed to watch in stillness, not interfering, just listening. As the sun dipped behind a thick curtain of trees, the golden light that once filtered to the leaves faded into deep shades of blue and gray. The forest transformed. What had seemed enchanted in daylight now shifted into something colder, something uncertain. Shadows stretched across the forest floor, creeping between tree trunks and swallowing every trace of warmth. The air grew heavy with moisture, and the temperature dropped quickly, biting at skin and fur alike. In the growing darkness, the usual sounds of the forest changed. The chirping birds grew quiet. Distant rustles began to echo with new meaning, the kind of movements that spoke not of play, but of hunger, eyes open in the undergrowth, invisible to all but nature itself. Predators awakened, silent, unseen, but ever present. Yet in the middle of this shifting wilderness, two small bodies remained close. The baby, unaware of the lurking dangers, stayed beside the cub, now curled into a trembling ball. The cub's breathing had slowed, not in comfort, but in sheer exhaustion. Its strength was fading with the warmth of the day. Still, the child did not cry. Perhaps it was too tired. Perhaps something in its heart sensed the fear that pressed in from the trees. And so, the baby leaned closer, placing its tiny body against the cub's, trying to give what little warmth it had left. Their closeness formed a small pocket of safety, even if only in feeling. A fragile shield against the weight of the forest night. Their shared body heat created a thin barrier between them and the chill that surrounded everything else. The baby's small hand remained on the cub's back, unmoving, a quiet gesture carrying a world that offered none. Around them, the forest waited. Branches creaked. Leaves shivered. Somewhere far off, a low growl echoed, deep and slow. The baby didn't know it, but the forest was no longer just trees and silence. It was now a place of threat. And yet, in that little clearing, beneath the skies slowly filling with stars, two souls refused to part. They were not safe, but they were not alone. Back at the edge of the forest, the atmosphere was no longer one of relaxation and laughter. Panic had settled in like a heavy fog. The baby's absence had gone unnoticed for only a few minutes, but in that short time, everything had changed. The parents, one seated near the fire, now ran in frantic circles, calling out the child's name with trembling voices. The quiet forest, so peaceful earlier in the day, now felt like a wall that had swallowed their world whole. Flashlights were turned on. Campers nearby joined the effort, voices rising and falling in urgency. But the child was small and the woods were vast. It wasn't long before the family called the authorities, their voices shaking with fear as they described what had happened. The sun had already slipped below the horizon, and with every passing minute, the forest grew darker. Everyone understood one terrifying truth. Time was working against them. Within the hour, a forest rescue team arrived. Dressed in heavy gear and armed with radios, maps, and thermal sensors, they moved quickly, knowing that night searches came with both danger and limitations. The temperature was dropping fast. A child alone in the woods would not last long. Among the responders was a local bear tracker, a quiet man who knew the forest better than anyone. He examined the ground near the edge of the trees and pointed to fresh signs, small footprints in the soil, a few broken twigs, faint impressions that suggested the direction the baby had taken. He moved with calm precision, following the trail deeper into the woods, using only a dim red light to preserve night vision. He noted other marks too, the shape of large paw prints nearby. A mother bear had passed through this way recently. The tracker's face darkened slightly, concern rising in his eyes. Bears and babies did not belong in the same sentence, especially in the dark. Still, he pressed on. The others followed behind, calling out carefully, checking clearings and dense patches of brush. The search was slow but desperate. They all knew that the forest was no place for a child. And as the hours passed, hope became more fragile with every step forward. As the sky began to shift from black to soft blue, the forest slowly emerged from the grip of night. The trees, once shadowy and menacing, now stood still under the quiet light of early dawn. A thin mist clung to the ground, curling around roots and rocks, while the air grew slightly warmer with the promise of morning. The search team, exhausted and aching, moved slowly to the fading darkness, their voices now low and tired. Most had begun to fear the worst. Every hour that passed had added weight to that fear. Then, near a shallow stream hidden between mossy banks and thick ferns, one of the team members paused. Something unusual lay just ahead, barely visible through the trees. The shape was strange, too still to be wildlife and too small to be one of the rescuers. A quiet call brought the others close. They approached with caution, hearts pounding, afraid of what they might find. When the mist cleared, they froze. Lying on the damp forest floor, curled into a small, fragile shape, was the missing baby. Beside the child, nestled so close that their bodies touched, was a bear cub. Both were motionless at first glance, but then the baby's chest rose with a slow breath. The cub stirred slightly, its paw twitching in response. They were alive. The team stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the sight before them. Two creatures, so different and so vulnerable, had survived a long night by holding on to each other. No one spoke right away. The moment felt sacred, as if any sound might break its delicate magic. Carefully, the rescuers stepped forward. One wrapped the baby in a warm blanket, checking for signs of injury. Another bent low to examine the cub, noting its weak but steady breathing. The tracker, standing a few steps back, removed his cap and looked away, his eyes wet. No one could explain what had happened during the night, but everyone who stood there understood they had witnessed something rare, something that didn't fit into logic or training manuals. It was more than survival. It was a miracle. News of the discovery spread quickly, first through local stations and then to national networks. By noon, the story had traveled across continents. Images of the baby resting peacefully beside the bear cub filled television screens and news feeds. It was a kind of headline that didn't just shock, it softened. In a world often overwhelmed by conflict and fear, this story offered something entirely different, a moment of quiet connection, a living example of innocence bridging the gap between species. Medical teams confirmed that both the baby and the cub would recover. The child had only minor scratches and signs of exposure. The cub, though injured, responded well to care from wildlife experts. Photos of the baby clutching a blanket, wide-eyed and smiling, appeared alongside footage of the cub resting comfortably in a small enclosure, surrounded by caretakers. What stunned people most wasn't just their survival. It was the calmness of the baby. Experts studied the footage, puzzled by how the child had remained silent through night, how it had not cried out in fear or wandered away. There were no signs of panic, only warmth, as if somehow the baby had understood that the cub needed it. And perhaps, in its own small way, the child needed the cub too. Messages poured in from across the world. Letters from parents, notes from wildlife conservationists, comments from strangers who said they had cried while reading the news. Some called it a miracle, others a lesson in purity. Artists painted the scene. Poets wrote verses. For a brief moment, the world paused, not to debate or divide, but to marvel. And in that quiet forest, now roped off of protection, something lingered. The trees stood tall, the stream still flowed, but people now saw it differently, not just as a place of wild nature, but as a setting where something extraordinary had happened, a moment where fear gave way to compassion, where instinct was met by innocence, and where a silent embrace between two lost beings reminded the world that even in the darkest places, kindness can still grow. Several days after the forest had quieted and the world's attention shifted toward healing and reflection, something unexpected happened. The same tracker who had helped lead the rescue was walking along a distant trail near the stream when he noticed fresh prints, large, deliberate, and unmistakable. A mother bear had returned. Word spread among the wildlife team, and they began monitoring the area carefully. Cameras were set up at a respectful distance, capturing every movement without disturbing the natural rhythm of the woods. Then, one morning, she appeared. Emerging from the shadows of the trees, the mother bear moved slowly, cautiously. Her steps were deliberate, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She paused often, sniffing the air, her nose lifting slightly as she followed a trail invisible to human eyes. Near the edge of the temporary care center set up for the cub, she stopped. There was no aggression in her stance, only stillness. The cub, now resting under close observation, stirred. It lifted its head and gave a small, quiet sound, not fear, not pain, but something closer to longing. The mother didn't move closer, but her eyes remained fixed in place. The distance between them was no longer about fear or danger. It was something else. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps guilt only nature could understand. Those who watched from afar said she stood there for a long time before turning back into the woods. Not in panic, not in flight. Just a slow, thoughtful departure, as if something unfinished had finally found a kind of peace. In that brief moment, the forest had held something rare again, a silent return. A mother who had once chosen to walk away, now standing in the shadow of what could have been. And perhaps, deep within her, understanding what had been lost and what had been saved. Some stories live quietly in the corners of nature, hidden beneath leaves and branches, never to be seen. But this one broke through. It was not a tale of survival shaped by strength or instinct alone. It was shaped by something softer. A baby too young to know fear, and a bear cub too weak to fight back met in a forest that should have separated them. Yet they stayed. They shared warmth, stillness, and the silent understanding of two souls simply trying to exist. The mother bear's return days later only added another layer to the mystery of what the wild truly holds. Her silence spoke volumes. Her stillness was more powerful than any sound. And while she left again, something about her presence lingered, as if even she'd been changed by what had happened. This story was never just about a lost child or an abandoned cub. It was about the power of unexpected connection. It reminded the world that even in places ruled by survival, kindness can still bloom without warning. That sometimes the most innocent among us carry the strength to touch hearts without ever speaking a word. If this story moved you, let it stay with you. Let it remind you of the quiet strength and compassion, even when it comes from the most unlikely of places. And if you want to experience more powerful stories that reveal the hidden beauty in nature and life, consider joining our journey. Subscribe to our channel, where stories like these continue to unfold, each one reminding us that hope can be found in the most surprising places. Your support helps us share moments that the world should never forget.